Assalamualaikum, everyone. Thank you for joining in. Brief bio on her. Ayah Issa is a therapist who works with trauma, spirituality issues, identity issues, depression, anxiety, and relationship conflict. She received her social work degree from Columbia University School of Social Work with a concentration on international affairs and community work. She works through a trauma lens with an understanding of community, spirituality, intersectional identities, and a holistic view of the self. And if you'd like to contact her, you can email at ayahisatherapy@gmail.com, and I'll include that in the chat. And throughout the session, feel free to use the Q&A session or the chat box if you have any questions during the session. Thank you.
Hi, Assalamualaikum. Yes, thank you, Hannah, for the introduction. Today, we're going to be talking about mental wellness. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me just go into it. So we're going to be talking about mental wellness today. And again, as Hannah had mentioned, we have the Q&A open as well as the chat box. I'm not going to be checking the chat box the entire time, but I'm going to try and look into it as often as I can. And if you have any questions and answers, I'm going to try and leave some time at the end to make sure to address them. So go ahead and write the questions and look through it periodically as we're going through this presentation to see if there's anything that needs an immediate answer. So for what we're going to be talking about today is the mental wellness. I'm going to first go through the basic definition of mental wellness and then go a little bit deeper into its components and how we're going to actually improve these components. There's going to be a couple of components. I'm going to focus on what I've noticed is the most important ones within my work. And talk about both the theory and also just practical ways of being able to achieve mental wellness. For the interactive suggestion, I personally really like engagement, but because it's a virtual webinar, it's a little harder to do interactive. So again, I'll answer any questions you have at the end. And Hannah, I believe, had already sent my email address. You can definitely email me and we can we can communicate further through email or set up a phone call. So the intention for this webinar is I want to set intentionality, something I really enjoy doing in everything that I am part of. And I want this to, and I wish you guys would also set your own intention for this webinar, where it's as helpful as possible to help increase your mental wellness, and that it inspires you to think of your mental wellness in a different way in which we usually think about wellness. So before we kind of go into talking about all these things, I want to first talk about where I even kind of came up with the idea of mental wellness. Mental wellness is not an idea I came up with, but where it kind of I started looking more into it was I was having this conversation with my brother one time, and we were talking about how difficult it is for people to deal with mental health in comparison to maybe the rest of the animal kingdom, that we specifically as humans deal with our mental wellness much more. And so I was challenging the idea of, is it that we struggle with our mental wellness more than the rest of the animal kingdom, or is it that we don't recognize the fact that mental health is constantly in existence with us? And the way I kind of came upon this idea is if we were talking about physical wellness for a second. There isn't a thing about physical wellness that we haven't tried to learn more about or expand about. We have doctors, physical therapists, rheumatoid doctors, orthopedic doctors, we have dentists, we have dermatologists. Every part of our bodies has a specialty in which someone is specialized in and deals with. We also then have trainers and nutritionists, and we have science on food, and we also have gyms and all types of fields for sports. There's so many resources invested in our physical well-being and image. And while we're starting to realize that some of these things may actually be harmful in the excessive attention on our bodies, we don't look down on any of these things. From a more basic level, we don't look down on a person for needing to sleep or eat or drink or take a shower, use the bathroom. We don't even think about these at all. We just naturally do them. So I wanted us to start thinking about our mental wellness in the same basic necessity and acceptance as we do for our physical wellness. Because mental health always exists within us, but we only start talking about it when someone's experiencing severe depression or suicidality. It's only when a mental illness occurs that we then start thinking about our mental health. So in terms of going on to like, what is the purpose of our mental wellness? It helps us navigate everything that we go through, life, stress, mental illness. It helps us become more resilient, and it keeps things in perspective for us. And COVID was a really interesting time, especially as a therapist, because it was the first time in which we saw the effects, the direct effects on a really large level of not taking care of mental wellness on a very instinctual way. So we're gonna go through all this stuff, but before that, we wanna have a deeper definition of what is mental wellness. But the first thing was from the slide is of taking away that we need to start looking at mental wellness as the start of things, rather than only when things become bad or really hard to deal with. So going to the definition of mental illness, the World Health Organization defines it as a state of well-being in which the individual realizes their own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. The Global Wellness Institute is also, I highly recommend, they have a really great website that goes in detail about mental wellness and what it means, and and how it kind of correlates with mental illness, and that they're not really, mental wellness and mental illness are not separate, not necessarily on different sides of the spectrum. Mental wellness is similarly to working out regularly. And let's say, someone goes through something stressful where they break a leg or something. A person who has been able to take care of their physical body is able to go through that physical illness. So it's the same thing with mental wellness, is that when we have this ability to work on our mental health on a daily, again, very instinctive practice, it makes these things in which the World Health Organization speaks about easier. We can cope with the normal stresses of life. We can do the stuff we want to do. We're able to make a contribution to our communities in the way we want to. And so right now, what I would want us to, what we're gonna go into is what I talk about, which is my mental wellness wheel. I went ahead and recreated the wheel of balance. So the wheel of balance is essentially this wheel without the mental wellness in the middle. And the wheel of balance, or they call it the wheel of life as well, is used often in coaching programs or ways to get people to look at their lives and see if they're achieving balance within. It's a good way to see where you're at in terms of, how am I taking care of all these aspects within my life. The thing, though, is that it often doesn't consider ourselves, our mental wellness, or our mental health, and how that affects, everything within our lives. Sometimes it becomes more like a list of checklists in which you need to accomplish to figure out the balance. So what we want to kind of look into this, going back from 2 slides ago, is recognizing that the mental wellness of ourselves is in the center of everything else that we do. If you find it helpful, you can definitely take the time to draw this for yourself, but just leaving the mental wellness circle a little larger, because we're going to add some things into mental wellness more towards the end of this webinar. Now, what I also kind of want us to look back into is going back to our earlier definition, which is mental wellness being a state of well-being, in which the individual is able to recognize their abilities, can cope with normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and can do what they want to do within community. If we don't put mental wellness at the middle of this circle and pay attention to our mental wellness, what can sometimes happen is something like this, where the things that we are participating in start becoming things that hurt our mental health, which is, again, why we want to start with mental wellness, and we want to start re-understanding our lives from being informed from our mental wellness, rather than understanding all of those categories without mental wellness, without having that recognition for ourselves. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go deeper into this, which is, these are the components that I came up with. I took some, again, this is stuff that I had taken from the Global Wellness Institute, positive psychology, and my personal experience within therapy, about what I've noticed are some of the most important things to pay attention to within mental wellness. I'm going to go into definition, a brief definition of every single one of these, but I'm going to go deeper into only three. These three, I think, are the most important, or the most important in terms of like the struggle with them. So let's go into a brief definition of each one of them. So I'm going to give you a second to look through them. So the first thing is our inner voice. And our inner voice is one of the components in which I'm going to talk much more about. So we're just going to keep it as, how we talk to ourselves, how we narrate our lives to ourselves. The second one is interactions. I'm not necessarily liking the word interactions right now. It's more awareness of interactions that I actually would like you to note down. And that's how we feel before or after an interaction with an event or a person or a thing. This is another component in which I'm going to talk more about. The third one is connection, which is intentionality and presence within our relationships, making sure that asking ourselves, what is the quality of our relationships, whether that's with God or our friends or family or romantic partners. And really taking the time in going in depth with every single one of these relationships. Do I feel good in these relationships? Do they feed me? Am I helping this person within this relationship? Is this a positive relationship? Do I feel safe within this relationship? Another thing that's really important is impact. And that's the impact we want to have, which impact doesn't necessarily have to mean career. We're not all trying to be the next big whatever it is. It's not about unnecessarily high goals, but we want to talk about what is it we want to impact within our lives here? What is important to us? Is it simply sharing kindness? Is it simply having the people that are around us, recognizing that we love them? What is the thing that you want to be doing? And thinking about how you can start achieving that. thing. That's really important because it connects us to the world, it connects us to achievement, it connects us to doing good in whatever way it is that you would want to do good. So I'm going to move on into the next 4. So this slides, we're going to be talking about gratitude. Again, gratitude is going to be one of those in which I talk more about. We're also going to be talking about healing, which is healing from something that comes up often. So within all of these things of mental wellness, there are some things in which we do need to heal more from. And it's okay to be healing more from it, whether it's something that is a pain from something in the past, or it's something that comes up often, and we'll start noticing after we do the deeper work right now within this session about inner voice and interactions, or awareness of interactions, is that the things that we need to heal from will continue coming up, and making sure that we are giving ourselves the time and space to heal from whatever it is that we need to heal from. The next thing is physical. And by physical, I mean sleep and movement, sleeping and moving adequately, attending to our physical body. Sleep is one of those things that within myself and within my career, I've noticed is incredibly impactful for a person. When you sleep better and you take care of your sleep hygiene, and you're making sure that you're sleeping, a good amount of hours, and you're comfortable in your sleep, and you're doing whatever it is that you can to make sure you're sleeping well, everything else within this mental wellness circle becomes more manageable, becomes easier. The other thing as well is movement. And movement doesn't mean that we need to be training every single day. It means that moving adequately, moving your body somehow. I know that's something that we all suffered from through COVID, but movement helps, move the blood and increase oxygen to our brains, which increases our abilities to think, and it increases our ability to stay positive, because we're able to choose to think in the way that we are aware is more important for us or is helpful for us. And the last thing I want to go over is rest, and then we're going to go deeper again. Rest is taking time to rest without distractions or through distractions. Rest is not necessarily a vacation every 2 months. Mental wellness is something that's accessible. Everybody can have access to mental wellness. You don't need to be at a certain financial level to be able to take care of yourself. And resting without distractions or through distractions, you don't actually need a lot of time for that, but you need to give yourself it often. And so what does that look like? That could look like drinking tea for 5 to 10 minutes while looking outside a window, and giving yourself that time to breathe as you are drinking tea. That could be rest, and giving yourself that multiple times a day. Rest does not only exist on the weekend, nor does it only exist on vacation. We need to give ourselves the time to recoup, to breathe, to allow our brains to keep going. Now, I didn't talk about emotional health as a separate component, and the Global Wellness Institute does see it as a separate component, but I did not talk about it because I'm actually going to talk about it within inner voice and awareness of interaction. So our emotional well-being is going to be coming through those two things, and as well healing and making sure that we are spending time to heal. So inshallah, let's go into inner voice. Inner voice. So inner voice is the way in which we talk to ourselves. We often don't realize how our voice talks to us. The first thing we have to do is recognize it. And the best way to recognize it is to notice how you react. But before I go into that, I want to give you kind of like an idea to think about the inner voice. So imagine a marathon. You're attending a marathon and there are people running through this marathon. And on the sidelines of these marathons, there are always people who cheer at every couple of checkpoints. Imagine what would happen to this marathon is if you removed all the people that cheered and just put people that booed the entire time, or said really mean things, or put down the people who were running. You're gonna notice a lot less people coming to these marathons because it's not a point in which people are being celebrated. That's essentially the way our inner voice works. Is when that our inner voice works to either celebrate ourselves or to put ourselves down. I know a lot of people would say, well, you know, my inner voice is very critical and that's good because it keeps me online and it keeps me going. But again, think about the marathoners. Which one is better? The person who, which one feels more productive? The one who is cheering or the one who's constantly booing? Another way that actually the story was said to me by one of my professors is if you have ever been around toddlers. Toddlers, when they are walking, take a really long time to walk sometimes. And us as adults, you know, we all, alhamdulillah, understand how to walk. When we're watching toddlers, we don't get annoyed at them for not knowing how to walk. We don't get angry at them for stumbling. We cheer every single time we see a toddler get up, and we start, you know, taking out our cameras to take a video of them, and we're very proud of them. And so what I would wonder would happen for us is if every time we stumbled, we didn't take that as a sign of failure, but as a sign of the fact that we tried, or every time we stumbled, we again did not take it as a sign that we didn't know something, but learned how to not do something, how much more we would be able to keep taking care of ourselves and being kind to ourselves. Now, how do we, kind of going back to the point of recognizing how we are reacting to our thoughts, that thing I had said at the beginning of this. You recognize your inner voice when you start going into, well, how am I actually reacting? That's one of the easiest ways. So if I'm suddenly starting to feel very, very down, or if I behave in a thing that I necessarily would not have wanted to, like if I had lost my temper, or if, you know, I had done another act, or I skipped the gym when I had really wanted to go to the gym, catching that behavior and then going back, well, what was I thinking before then? And then what was I thinking before that? And coming to the point of that root thought that we had, which may sound something like, I will never succeed. Once we start being able to catch these thoughts, something that's very helpful is to write them down. Write down these thoughts. Now, these thoughts are usually very limiting. They're usually, they sound something like, I will never succeed, or I will always be a failure. The words never, the words always are very limiting. We don't really know how these things are going to come out. We don't really know what's going to happen. But when someone's saying, I will never succeed, going to the root of that really may sound more like, I'm struggling right now. And so when you switch the phrase from I will never succeed to I am struggling right now, the phrase I am struggling right now is a much kinder phrase. It's a phrase in which can lead to opportunities. It can lead to the thought that, all right, I'm struggling right now, but I have the ability to do better. I'm struggling right now, but that doesn't mean that I am not good enough. And that then allows us to continue going through whatever it is that we want to go through, achieving the things that we want to achieve. whether that's relationship or career or going to the gym. You'll start noticing, once you do this enough times, you'll start noticing that your thoughts will naturally change. And then as a normal reaction to that, your behaviors will also start to change. Now, again, if you guys have any questions, you can definitely put that in the Q&A or in the chat box. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next one, which is interactions. And again, I want to change this title to awareness of interactions. I was not able to change it earlier. So awareness of interactions is, we're not talking about simple interactions here. We're not talking about the things that you, like, for example, shopping from Amazon. We're talking about any interaction you have throughout the day with something within your life, whether that is with work or that is with school, with the gym. We're talking a lot about the gym today, apparently, with whatever it is that's going on through your life, and paying attention to these interactions, paying attention to everything in which you consume, whether it's through your mouth or through your eyes or through your ears, and noticing how you're feeling before and after every time you interact with these things. The reason why we're noticing is because it helps us realign to what we actually want to do. It takes us back to intentionality, which is what we had started this webinar with. And it helps us kind of like realign into, well, this is something I unconsciously do and actually harms me, and I would rather figure out a better way to do this. And starting to have that sort of intentionality about the way we proceed in our lives. A good example of this is social media. And I'm sure every one of you guys, or many of you guys, have had to do social media breaks every now and then, because of how negative it can be, depending on the content you're consuming. Especially, and then with social media, I remember I was part of a group one time, and someone had asked the question to that therapist of, how do you deal with Instagram and all of its negativity? And the therapist replied, well, I don't really know what you're talking about, because the things I see on Instagram are incredibly positive. And that's about being intentional about what it is I'm seeing. It's not, we don't want to get to the point of completely removing something that you need within your life, whether that is social media because that connects you to people, or if you enjoy music, or if you enjoy going to socially interacting with people, but understanding within yourself, well, what is the part that makes me feel good and what doesn't make me feel good, and how can I remove the things that don't make me feel good to make me continue feeling happy with who I am and what I want. When we're able to pay attention to these things for ourselves, we're able again to be intentional about the way we continue on with our lives. We're able to make sure that we are in positive spaces. And the positive spaces and what we surround ourselves with also then affects the inner voice that we just talked about. It also affects just our normal thought processes. What is it that, who do we want to get to? So that's on interactions. I am going to go ahead and move to the next slide to talk about gratitude. I'm going to also just take a quick water break, and I will go into this question and answer it to the best of my ability. after gratitude. So going into gratitude. Gratitude is one of those things that I think is often misused. Gratitude is often used in a moment of, when someone's complaining about something, or someone is talking about, well, this is really hard for me, or the situation's incredibly toxic. We often tell them, oh, well, make sure you're being grateful for God, if, so that you don't have something negative happen to you. Or at least be grateful for the blessings that you have. Sometimes it's almost used as a sort of threat, that if you're not grateful, then God will take it away from you. The other way in which gratitude is often used that I've noticed is making something, and it's similar to what I just said, but making something that is inherently incredibly negative positive. When we talk about gratitude, we're not talking about toxic positivity. We're not trying to switch a negative experience into a positive experience. When we are going through a hardship, we want to go through that hardship. We want to experience the hardship, and we want to learn from the situation, and we want to grow from that situation. We don't want to act like that hardship doesn't exist. We want to lean on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we also want to do our part. So we definitely want to pray, and we definitely want to do whatever it is we have to do to take care of ourselves and remove ourselves from that hardship. And the way I kind of see it is we're not being grateful simply because, we should be grateful. I think actually gratefulness is a blessing that we're asked to do, because you can't be grateful about something that you don't see. You can't, which then means that you actually need to see the good in a situation, or I'm going to say in your life, not a situation actually. And seeing the good is incredibly important because it gives you hope. We have this idea again with good and hardship, is that you will only experience that good thing is if you go through something hard. No pain, no gain. At the end of this incredibly hard journey you're going through, only then will you find the good at the end of that journey. And so you have to go through that hardship so that you can get that good. But the way I like to frame it is through this verse, which is, so surely with hardship comes ease. And the idea that I enjoy about this is that with every hardship you experience, there is ease. It's not necessarily that the hardship brings ease. It's not necessarily that the ease is through the hardship. But the way I understand it is that in whatever situation that you are in, there is always ease that's happening. There's always something good that is in the world that's helpful, because when we're going through something hard and we're able to see something good. So for example, it's been raining. The thunderstorms hit New York City from the last couple of days. And I'm sure a lot of people experience property damage from it. But from my aspect of experiencing this rain didn't allow me to go outside and do everything that I had to do. But I also had the opportunity to experience the rain and make my favorite soup, for example. That then gives you, when you're able to apply that perspective on anything challenging that is going through, you're able to focus on the challenge, knowing that there is good somewhere there. And it takes us out of this small black room that sometimes we enter when life feels like it's too much. And I don't personally, I think that you don't necessarily need to look for the good, but you just need to know that it's there. And that is enough to kind of reassure that, or to me, to reassure that I'm gonna go through this thing knowing that, when I go through this thing, that there is good within the situation, or there is good within my life right now. And I know subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me good. And, there it is through the ayah. But yeah, so that's essentially what we have talked about within inner voice, changing the inner voice, interactions, and gratitude. I'm going to move into Q&A right now. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. There's this question here, which is, how does inner voice connect to waswasa? So as I'm not an Islamic scholar, I don't necessarily want to speak to waswasa. I don't feel like I have the ability to talk much about waswasa. The way from the psychological perspective of working with the inner voice, we generally see the inner voice from kind of like psychological perspective as so from my spiritual perspective and also the psychological perspective, I would combine it to be a combination of the negative thoughts that we have, which could be informed, by the shaitan, and as well by the inner voices in which generally we were treated with. So the way in which we were spoken to as we were growing up is usually the voice that we then take in to inform the way we see the world. So if something bad happens, and this is something that I noticed a lot within specifically people who have gone through war situations or severe terrorism, is that everything that they interpret after that event has ended, or after they have ended from that incredibly challenging time, especially if they were kids going through it, it starts to become a crisis every time something small happens. Like a small car accident happens, and it's, oh my goodness, what is this going to create within my life? Or, God must be punishing me through this. So generally the way we look at inner voice is, as I mentioned, it's the voice in which we were raised with, and it's also the way in which we look at the world through. Is the world a safe world, or is it a scary world? Is the world a place in which we are not good enough, and so we're constantly giving ourselves that message, and we're constantly berating ourselves or shaming ourselves, either religiously or through achievements. So that's generally the way I look at inner voice, and the combination of inner voice and waswasa. So in terms of also the waswasa piece, because sometimes, and again, I can't go deep into the waswasa conversation, but sometimes we will put work that we need to do as from the inner voice part as maybe the shaitan is saying this, or the shaitan's putting these thoughts in, but sometimes these are our thoughts. This is the way we look at the world. And so what can we also do for ourselves? Okay, so I'm going to go into the next question. And this next question is, do you have any tips to not feeling guilty about taking care of oneself? How do we begin having these conversations, taking inventory on our mental health? Which are common mistakes you see people make? Should we avoid when we start this journey? So I think this is a really big question. Thank you for asking it. I think the first thing I would say is that when you start this journey, practice patience. Practice patience and practice a lot of patience and a lot of grace. Think of it as, the way I like to look at it is, and this is not to demean anybody, but I'd like to look at it as a little child. I'm taking care of this little child. So how will I deal with this little child as I am teaching them this new skill? How will I be patient and kind and loving and know that they will probably make mistakes several times over, but I'm not going to give up because I know that they are trying. So that's the first thing. Is my first thing is mindset. How do you do that? Now, in terms of how do we begin having these conversations and taking inventory on our mental health, that's where I would start with the inner voice and interactions. I'm gonna actually, let me go back to the slide with, these are all the things, again, to kind of go back and that I think are important. I would start with inner voice and interactions, being aware of our inner voice, being aware of how to change our inner voice, being aware of what is it that's affecting me, and that's through interactions, and what is it that every time I interact with that I feel worse after. I think that's the biggest thing. In terms of, do you have any tips to not feel guilty about taking care of oneself? I honestly see it as an amana. I see it as a trust. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us this life. And part of us having this life is going through this life. Part of us being able to go through this life is to take care of ourselves. We show up better for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the purpose of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by being better through taking care of our mental wellness. I can pray better when I am taking care of, I'm making sure I'm experiencing, I'm practicing gratitude. I can be better to other people when I am taking care of myself, when I am resting and I'm healing, when I am sleeping well and I'm practicing my inner voice. I show up better for my community and for my purpose as a Muslim or as a person in this world. That's how I see it. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question, which is, if someone actively practices mental wellness habits, is there any exercises to continuously improve on that you would recommend? If I were to think on this, if someone is already practicing mental wellness habits, there's two things that I would recommend. First of all is pay attention to the awareness of interactions. If you feel like something doesn't feel good, pay more attention to that, right? I'm saying when I'm saying that, it's like as within yourself, within your own mental wellness. If you feel like your mental wellness is struggling, start to pay attention to the parts in which it struggles more. Is it struggling more in the morning or after work or before work? Does it struggle more during a work day or a weekend? Does it struggle more around family or friends or by yourself? That's the first thing that I would do, is look at where the struggle is popping up. The second thing is, then I would also recommend healing. I personally, as a therapist, I recommend therapy for everybody. It's great to be able to dedicate that time for ourselves. But if you're noticing that something still keeps coming up, no matter how much time and change and rest and switching of the inner voice, I would then bring someone else to kind of look at it with you, and to see if there's something that, healing would be helpful from. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go into the last question, which is, what do you feel are the limitations of secular models like the wellness model to conceptualize and treat Muslim mental health in particular? I think for the mental wellness model, so this mental wellness idea, this one that I had created, this was the one that I had created. Mental wellness is looked at differently in other situations. I think the only thing is that's important, and if I were to even kind of go into mental health as well, I think the biggest drawback that sometimes happens is spirituality. The thing that I do want to challenge here, though, as well, is that mental health and the wellness model and these, secular models are also treating the person. And as the person is being treated, right, we generally, of course, like when we want to go for a physical illness, we'll go to any doctor, regardless of what they are treating. I mean, what their religious background is or how they'll treat you religiously. Generally, that's how we would do it. And sometimes, we'll obviously go more in particular to our Muslim doctors, but our main concern is to get physically well so that we can become whole as humans. I mean, not whole as humans, sorry, become physically well and participate in all the things that we want to be able to participate in. And so I think within therapy and within mental wellness, we need to just focus on getting better mentally. And then every person then adds that spirituality aspect for themselves. And every person is able to recognize, well, how do I add this for me? So for this model that I made up, connection is something in which you pay attention, you can use it to pay attention to your connection with God from a spiritual lens. Sleep and movement, these are also parts of that I would also see as spiritual, because we're sleeping well to wake up, to be productive in our lives, and to be connected to us. Same thing with healing. When we don't heal from something, we sometimes become that thing rather than it becoming something that happened to us. So I think that there's always a lens in which we can use any model to benefit us as Muslims, or any religious aspect per se. And that's where, so these are the basics, and that's where we can make it more personalized for ourselves within spirituality, and connecting to God in the way that is helpful for us and helpful for our faith. So these are all of the questions that we've had. I think if there is anything else that I would want to actually go over, which is something a sister had asked, or a brother, which is reminding ourselves as we're going through this, is to continue practicing patience. You're going through that, and just the fact that you are going through it, you are putting in the effort, being aware that it's not going to be a night and day switch, and at every aspect you can continue working on yourself and working on this mental wellness. Someone else asked a question, which was, how does spirituality bring mental wellness? So the way I had actually looked at it was, I think that there's two ways to look at this, which was spirituality can bring mental wellness. The way I looked at it was mental wellness can bring spirituality as well. Spirituality can bring mental wellness when we focus on what subhanahu wa ta'ala means for us. When we understand the religion in the way that the religion is meant, which is, in my opinion, and again, I'm not an Islamic leader here, so I'm not going to go too in depth in this conversation, but there is nothing that I see within Islam that advocates for harm in ourselves. And so that's where I would then bring in interactions, and I would bring in connection and bring in gratitude and impact and healing, is that spirituality can influence the betterment of each one of those aspects that I had just mentioned, which again, inner voice, being kind to yourself. And spirituality can also help us with our interactions. Personally, for me, I went through a journey within within my Islamic journey of trying something and recognizing, well, this doesn't necessarily feel too good for me. I feel worse spiritually after I do this. So then I'm going to step away from this thing that is now hurting me. So that's how I would see spirituality into bringing better mental wellness. Is how do I do something? But it has to, the thing is always is that we have our inner fitra, which I think is the way in which we recognize if something feels good or doesn't feel good. And when I say good, I don't necessarily mean pleasurable. I mean being aware if this is helpful for us or not. I'm gonna go ahead into the next question, which is, what do you do when one of your social or family interactions is most always bad? It's not an avoidable thing, especially with COVID trapping everyone in the house. So that's quite challenging. That is quite challenging, especially since, as you said, it's not avoidable. I think the first thing that I always would recommend doing is, if it's possible, to have a conversation with this person, with understanding why is this interaction happening the way it's happening, if that's possible. Is it possible to have these conversations to be able to amend the relationship, to be able to say, hey, this particular thing doesn't necessarily feel good when it's done this way. And then, if you've tried these things and you've tried these conversations and you either get complete resistance or you get denied of the fact that anything is happening, I would definitely recommend seeking more help, whether that's through a therapist or an imam or something, of figuring out what it is that you need to do to take care of yourself, to make sure that you're not in a space in which it constantly feels negative. I think it's incredibly important to be aware that you are worthy of taking care of yourself, and figuring out, well, what are the steps I need to do to make sure that I am being taken care of. So I'd start with a conversation, and from a conversation, see if you can have family members help, and if family members can't help, go through, possibly a therapist or an imam or someone that you trust, someone that you know would be able to see both your side, and also be able to speak with this person. I think that is our time. Again, that's our time. You can, if you have any questions or you want to talk more about therapy, mental health, you are more than welcome to send me an email at my email address. I believe Hannah just sent it again. Inshallah, you have a great night. Take care, and continue to rely on the strength Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already bestowed upon you. Have a good night. Masana.